There's only 4 left. We can do it. We can make it to the end. Let's do heavy cavalry. Let's do it. All right. If this is the first of this series you have clicked on, welcome to the all factions heavy cavalry tier list. Again, if you have watched this list before, you're like, don't do the spiel. Dude, I have to. This might be someone's first tier list they've clicked on for more content. All right, what we're gonna do is take all of the heavy cavalry in the game, put it together into this list, and decide which ones are the best and the worst. We will discuss a couple things, but one, this is not a campaign-specific tier list. We will not be focusing on, well, if you get this technology and this lord with this trait and this faction with this faction effect, yeah, that doesn't work, because what if you're playing a faction that doesn't have that lord or that faction effect? Do I rank everything like horned ones are great for tic-tac-toe, terrible for Mazda Mundi? Like that's going to get impossible to do a tier list on. So no, we're just looking at just horned ones with no buffs from lords or technologies or anything like that. But it's also not just a multiplayer tier list, because when I think of these, I do think about how useful they are in sieges or abusing AI tendencies or things like that. So I do factor those things in when I'm making my opinions. And then some people just assume I haven't played campaign for some reason. I have beaten every campaign in this game. I just don't stream it because no one comes to my streams for that. They watch me for multiplayer. All right. Today we'll be doing the heavy cavalry things, and I do mention gold, and I bring this up because it is important and I see comments on it a lot. I factor in gold because if you didn't factor in gold for how like gold efficient something is, all of the most expensive units would be your S tier, all the least expensive units would be your D tier, because they would just have the lowest stats. But yeah, so if you factor in how much stat you're getting per gold, that will also impact my opinion quite a lot. All right, let's do this and start off with a horned one. That is a D tier unit. And the crowd goes mild because people love horned ones, but I'm here to tell you they are garbage. Horned ones are terrible. They don't have bonus versus large. They are 1,500 gold. Relatively squishy, which is weird, but for heavy cavalry, they don't have the most armor. I feel like when they take engagements, they take a lot of damage back. They don't deal that much damage that quickly, and they're slow. As far as cavalry go, they're relatively slow, so they can't even outrun bad situations. They take a lot of damage from ranged units. There's just no upsides to horned ones. Unfortunately, they are just really bad. Sorry. Cold One Spear Riders, however, all the way up into S tier. Anti-large, armor piercing, moderate stats, not great stats, but moderate stats. And for only 1,000 gold, these guys got the elliptical models change with the Centaurs that, yeah, helped them a lot in like surrounding things or properly fitting into fights. These guys will keep coming back till the end of time. They'll never break. And to be fair, so will the horned ones, but these guys are 50%, well, not 50%. They're 500 gold less expensive. So they're 33% less expensive than a horned one. And they have bonus versus large. So they perform roughly at the same level, but one is way cheaper. Decently high armor, good stats. Yeah. Cold and Spear Riders are just fantastic right now. S tier cavalry for sure. Silver Helms, gonna go and see. Shielded or unshielded, Silver Helms have decently high stats, but for their price point, they're just not good enough at like, they're not good enough blockers. They still die pretty quickly in a lot of cav engagements or die to archers and that kind of things. So they're kind of a bog standard heavy cav that is priced as if it's something special. So I don't know. Silver Helms are getting buffs. They got 10 more armor here and there. I still think they're pretty bad, as I for some reason can't decide on how big I want their picture to be. I think they're C. They're just not very good, especially when you compare them to Dragon Princes, which are coming up next. So nah. Dragon Princes, B. The Fireborn might make you think the Dragon Princes are higher, but basic Dragon Princes are B tier. They're expensive, but they are elite. They are non-armor piercing, non-anti-large, fine, but they do have really high melee stats, good armor, great leadership, so they get B. They are fine. They're solid. They do good work. Silver Helms, terrible. These guys, great. Speaking of super fantastic, Cold One Knights of the Dark Elves, S tier. Better, in my opinion, than the Cold One Spear Riders. They do have murderous prowess, so after a bit of fighting, the Dark Elf army will pop this buff, and they'll get so much leadership that they're almost unbreakable, and they get more damage. They keep fighting pretty much to the end, even without it, and their elliptical model changes that I mentioned makes them amazing at surrounding a target and getting a ton of damage out. Cold One Knights are just smoking kids right now on 6.1, and honestly any 6.0 patch as well. Dark Elves have been relying on Cold One Knights for quite a while to stay relevant. Cold One Dread Knight's going to fall down to A tier. They are almost as good as Cold One Knights. The anti-large of Cold One Knights make Cold One Knights honestly perform better than Dread Knights in a lot of situations, and Dread Knights are more expensive. But all of that being said, trying to compare yourself to maybe the best heavy cav in the game right now, Cold One Dread Knights are still better than a lot of other cavalry. Armor piercing, high stats, good elliptical model formation so they can get good surrounds on things, crazy impact damage on infantry. Cold One Dread Knights are still an amazing cavalry option at A tier. Some of my pictures are weird because I use the asset kit CA sends to content creators. So this is supposed to be a Great Stag Knight. Must have been one of the early artworks for it. Great Stag Knights will be B tier. Elite, squishy cavalry, but very fast, high charge damage and good impact, and then good armor piercing stats. They're pretty good at taking out other heavy cavalry and infantry formations with great cycle charging. They're just weak to getting bogged down in light cavalry or poked by archers. So you want them to fight other elite stuff. You don't really want them to fight basic chaff. Unless they're cycle charging the chaff. They can cycle charge the heck out of chaff. Necropolis Knights also going down to D tier. I know Strat Game is going to hate me, but I am not a snake enjoyer. I think they're cool. I think they're terrible. I think they're cool, but they're very terrible. For how expensive they are, they do next to no damage. They are somewhat tanky, but not that tanky for their price. They're still weak to archers. They're weak to other anti-large cav, and I feel like even the halberd variant don't do that great versus enemy cav or enemy large targets. They have the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth problem I talked about in the monsters video. Sorry, the Dragon Ogre problem, not the Shaggoth, where I feel like these guys have a hard time getting a good surround. I often see them like 3 or 4 snakes will connect with the enemy, and the other snakes will all stand behind those snakes being like, go, get them. Yeah, do your best. And I'm like, can all of you get in there and fight? And they go, no. So pretty terrible. Black Knights recently got a buff that takes them out of C tier up to B. These would have been C tier except for the patch that just happened. Now at a cheaper price point, 950, that is more worth it to take these Black Knights. Black Knights do not do very much damage at all. They are just blockers and harassers. They chase down enemy archers or they block enemy cavalry, allowing Blood Knights to get in behind them or Vargeists to rear charge those cavalry. Black Knights are just the anvil upon which the hammer needs to fall, and they're pretty solid at it. They're B. Boar Boy Biggins, I believe, I'm just checking quick, I believe I treated Savage like a variant. So this is Orc Boar Boy Biggins or their Savage Orc Boar Boy Biggin variant. Both are A tier. Savage Orc Boar Boy Biggins have frenzy and more damage with some physical resistance, while their Orc Boar Boy variant have a bit of armor, and I think they have shields. Both have anti-large, both have armor piercing, and with a walk can get a lot of damage out. They get up to A tier. I'm tempted to put them in B because all Orc Boar Boy Biggins are terrible at killing infantry and pretty bad at killing large targets, but they do get into A because of how amazing they are at getting battlefield control, because they trade up into most other cavalry for a very cheap price point. 850 gold, or I think it's 1,050. No, Boar Boys are 900 now. Anyway, 900 gold or 1,050 is pretty cheap for anti-large and armor piercing. Just look at silver helms. Like, would you rather have a silver helm or an Orc Boar Boy Biggin? Even just an Orc Boar Boy Biggin, not even a Savage Orc one. The silver helm is either as expensive or 100 gold more expensive, and I would rather take the Orc Boar Boy Biggin. Savage Orc Boar Boy Biggin, definitely. So armor piercing and anti-large you normally pay a ton for, and these guys can get it nice and cheap. And similarly, the Orc Boar Boys and Savage Orc Boar Boys will make it into A tier for similar reasons. 650 gold or 700 gold. They don't get anti-large, but they do both have armor piercing. And again, you're paying for either frenzy and more melee stats with physical resistance, or you're paying for armor and shielded. But still, armor piercing at that cheap price point is very good. So all Boar Boys are pretty terrible at killing infantry and pretty bad against single entities, but they're very good at killing other cavalry for a very cost-effective price. Reichsguard. B. Reichsguard have gotten some buffs over several patches. They're doing okay. They are not quite an anvil cav, where it's like all I do is hold. Reichsguard do a bit of damage, but they don't have good armor piercing or anti-large, so they're mostly good at fighting light cavalry, light infantry, archers, things like that. And then anything that isn't those, they're blockers. They can block other heavy cav, they can block single entities, but They will do a lot of damage against stuff without armor. Strikes Guard, solid, fine. Empire Knights are going to go in B tier as well. Unlike the Reichsguard, they don't do any damage to anything ever besides light infantry that is unbraced. They can get some good charge on that. But these guys are just anvils, similar to Black Knights. Their whole point is to get in front of something and then hold it in place for someone else to show up and deal the damage. Whether it's War Wagons, Huntsmen, Outriders, Demigryph Knights, Karl Franz, Empire Knights just need to hold for the real heroes to show up and get the damage done. Demigryph Knights, halberds or regular, going to go into A tier after some buffs they've gotten over the years. Very solid units. They can now put out a lot of damage. Good at killing anything. Yeah, good at killing anything, honestly, besides skirmish cav. They can't catch most skirmish cav. They're a little slow. So as long as you avoid skirmish cavalry, these guys will have a field day fighting anything in front of them. They just need a bit of support because they're very expensive. So if you just trade too much HP over time, they'll get ground down to nothingness. But as long as you don't abandon them in the enemy backline, like if you have an Empire Spearman fighting a Savage Orc, and then Boar Boys come in from one side and the Demigryph comes in from the other side, and they both have infantry support, the Demigryph will do very well. So just don't be an idiot with them, and Demigryphs are quite solid. Probably not the best cavalry in the entire game, not by far, but, I'd say they're the gatekeepers of A. If you're better than them, you get into A. If you're worse, you're down in B. Chaos Knights. They'll go in B. Do I have variants in here? I wonder if I need to talk about variants or not. I don't think I got all of the marks because they don't matter that much. Yeah, I don't think I have the marks in here. So Chaos Knights, I'm going to put them in B. They have various marks, but honestly, all Chaos Knights for me would fall into B because for different reasons. Chaos Furies on that list, I was much more disparate with why... Oh, okay, that's why I did it this way. With Furies, I was more disparate on why they were certain things, like Tzeentch ones were D, while Slaanesh ones were B. Chaos Knights, everything for me was a B as I thought about it. Khorne have more melee attack and fire damage, which is solid, but you pay more for it. Basic Chaos Knights are amazingly tanky and do decent damage, kind of like Reichsguard, but they're the cheapest of them. Slaanesh ones have good charge bonus, especially if you get a rear charge on them, so that's fine. Tzeentch barriers are quite nice for cycle charging and keeping them healthy in the late game, and then Nurgle ones have crazy high melee defense, so they're not going anywhere. So all of them have positives, and all of them have the same negatives. They don't do much damage to armored targets. They don't do that much damage to single entities. They don't honestly do that much damage to light cavalry either, but they're all insanely tanky. They all can churn through infantry like nobody's business, and they're just really solid for being your constant buddy through a battle. Like, it's hard to lose a Chaos Knight right away. They're rather tenacious, so for constant battlefield presence, there's very few heavy cav that can be as reliable. Pegasus Knights, D tier. I know they just got a mass buff. I know they have magic damage. I know they have anti-large. They're too squishy. They're too squishy, too expensive, and too finicky. Pegasus mounts in general are just crazy, like finicky. Like, you get a perfect charge on something and half the models overshoot for no reason and miss the entire charge. Sometimes they'll just flutter up and down and not quite get the damage out. Sometimes they'll have issues surrounding something, and their low armor and low melee stats mean if you get caught on the ground, they just die. Pegasus Knights are too much risk for too little reward. They're D tier. Knights of the Realm are an S tier cavalry in my opinion. 950 gold for a high leadership, high armor, decently fast and responsive anti-large cavalry piece is fantastic. They have lance formation for a bit of extra stats for punching through infantry lines or some decent cav engagement. Knights of the Realm are great. Bretonnia has always appreciated having them, and while they won't kill most other heavy cav quickly, they can demolish light or demonic cavalry in a heartbeat. Knights of the Realm are great. Grail Knights also go up into S tier. They have taken several nerfs, but they are still the cream of the crop as far as elite knights go. Pseudo unbreakable for how hard they are to get off the field. Perfect vigor keeps their stats topped off at all times. They will never lose melee attack or leadership from being sleepy. Magic damage, good bonus versus large, good armor piercing. They're just super jacked Knights of the Realm, and they stay up in S tier with their cheaper companions. Royal Pegasus Knight's going to go in C tier. just barely getting out of D. They have all the same problems Pegasus Knights do, but with perfect vigor and higher stats. I have seen them used okay in certain situations. They are really good at fighting other flyers, for example, but once you get them on the ground, again, they're pretty limp. But at least they win the air fights, where Pegasus Knights kind of trade even, depending on who you're dealing with. Royal Pegasus Knights, just slightly better, but still kind of a gimmicky unit that sucks. Royal Hippogriff Knights, back up in S tier, monstrous flying cavalry, insane damage when they land, great fighters on the ground, great fighters in the air, amazing at surrounding and killing a single entity, and they have enough mass to push out of any problem and get back up into the sky. They are everything the Pegasus Knight variants wish they could be. Royal Hippogriff Knights are just reliable flying killers, and they're great. Questing Knights are weird. I'm going to put them in D tier, and I feel a little bad about it, but Questing Knights just don't operate. And I say this in some of these tier lists a lot, but there are units that their stat cards look great, and then they just don't follow through, and you wonder what the hell happened. And for me, that's Questing Knights. I can't get these guys to ever do great. I get them in great situations, I think I've set everything up for them, and then they just completely fumble the bag and die. I don't know. They don't do any damage. They're not that tanky. They're unshielded, so if they get shot, they take a lot of damage. They're poop. They're just poop. I hate them. I hate Questing Knights. Knights Errant are going to be C tier. They're pretty darn cheap. They're one of the cheapest heavy cavalry you can get in the entire game. And that's it. They don't have armor piercing like Orc Boys. They're shielded, I guess. They have okay melee stats, but they can't even grind with infantry that well. They can't kill heavy cavalry. They can barely kill light cavalry. They're kind of like armored dogs. They can just chase archers, I guess. They're okay. They're C. Grail Guardians. I'm going to put them in A. Grail Knights just have a couple more use case scenarios to keep them above Grail Guardians. Grail Guardians are the tanky infantry grinding version of the Grail Knights anti-large hunters. And I just find that to be a less useful archetype. Grail Guardians are still very good. I'm putting them up in A tier. That is above average. They're better than Demigryphs, probably better than Orc Boarboy Biggins. So they're probably on the bottom of, like, just on the cusp of reaching S, but not quite. I just think that lack of anti-large hurts them. And for their elite price point, it's weird to take a unit that fights mostly infantry. And they can fight other cavalry. You don't need anti-large to fight other cavalry. But if I think about them fighting Demigryph Knights with halberds, I mean, they would probably trade poorly in that mental fight. I'd have to go test it, but I'm not going to test every unit interaction here. Grail Guardians are okay. But, like, okay, they're better than okay. They're A. They're just not quite S. Wild Riders that aren't the Wild Hunters of Kurnos, you are a C tier unit. Heavy Cav, just kind of by default, but they don't have the armor most other Heavy Cav do, because they're Wood Elves. Makes them squishy to basic spears, basic archers. Even when they're shielded, they're pretty squishy to archers. Skirmish Cav, not having armor in a cavalry fight is pretty brutal, and then not having good armor piercing is also quite bad. At 1,000 or 1,100 price point, depending on if they're, like, shielded or not, they're fast and they hit really hard against unarmored targets, as long as that unarmored target isn't swinging back at them, I guess. Wild Riders are okay. They serve some niches the Wood Elves need for them, but, like, in competition with other heavy cav, it's not a good look for the Wild Riders. Knights of the Blazing Sun gonna get in on B tier. Lower stats than some of the other elite knights, but they do have incredible charge bonus and fire damage, which keeps them out of C tier. Up in B. They're not as great as Empire Knights at just sticking in a spot and holding for 1,200 gold. That's quite a lot for an anvil. So they do have to be kind of a hammer, and they don't have good armor piercing or anti-large, so they can't do great against armored targets. But they're situationally good. They're specialists. They're great versus stuff that's weak to fire, like trolls or skinwolves. They're really good at dealing with light cavalry because of their incredible charge bonus. So, yeah, Knights of the Blazing Sun can be quite good. Just B, due to their lack of, like, they're not good in every matchup, so hard to move them up. Blood Knights will be A after their recent buffs. It's close to jumping them down to B. They pay a lot. 1,700 gold is quite a lot to pay for a unit that does not have armor piercing, but they do have anti-large. They have very high base stats. I believe they have the hunger. so I think they slowly regenerate in melee. And they do have the Banner of Red Keep, so when they're Banner of Blood Keep, Red Keep, when they're out of melee combat, they have some pretty insane missile resistance that can get them into fights with relative safety. And then they have silver shields and high armor. So Blood Knights are still really tanky, really strong. And since they're undead, they'll never rout. They'll just keep fighting to the end. Could use some armor piercing, could use some cost reductions to make them truly good. But compared to other heavy cav, they are A tier. It seems weird that I push for buffs for them so often when they're already A tier, but I think the Vampire Counts roster in general needs buffs, and I like the Blood Knight playstyle, so I'm pushing for that to be their prominent playstyle, even though the Blood Knight itself is fine as a unit. Strong. Oh, I have Chaos Knights of Tzeentch here. Did I do that intentionally? Do I have the other Chaos Knights? Skull Crushers, Blood Crushers. Might have just been an oopsie poopsie. Yeah, it looks like an oopsie poopsie. All right, get out of here, Chaos Knights. Doom Knights of Tzeentch. See, they're on discs, which makes them tanky to missile fire and end of nice things to say. Doom Knights of Tzeentch are incredibly janky. I find it hard to surround something because they often just float themselves out of its way and let it escape. They're like, "Ooh, sorry, sir, I didn't mean to get in your way there. Please pass me." And I'm like, "No, hold them there, for the love of God." Lack of good armor piercing or anti-large stats makes them pretty whatever. And a crazy high price point means you can't just get 2 or 3 and use them as disruptors. It's just, they're just weird. They're weird, janky units. Their only saving grace is they are tanky, but usually I need them to do other stuff than be tanky, and they disappoint me at every turn. Heartseekers. I'll go with A tier due to their high price point and ease to kill. Low armor, unshielded, rely on physical resistance to keep them safe. Low HP pool as well, and they're in demonic, so if they get hurt too much, they just crumble away on their own. But for all that, all those negatives, they have one upside, and that upside is damage, son. That upside is enough to take them all the way out of D tier into A tier. Heartseekers of Slaanesh with crazy DPS output can quickly demolish any heavy cav on this list if they get a good charge on them. But they wouldn't want a fair fight. Like a Blood Knight and a fair fight against the Heartseekers, both of them are probably getting super low or dying. But Heartseekers, really, really good if you can protect them, give them good engagements. Just don't take honest fights with worse units. Like, you don't want to fight Glade Riders with Heartseekers. The Heartseekers will take more damage than it's worth. Having a unit that's 3 times as expensive fight a Glade Rider. Winged Lancers are gonna go in C tier. They were a little too strong after they got Glorious Charge when they were 850 gold, but they got cost increased it all the way up to 1,000 gold, which is a lot to pay for a unit that's pretty much an Empire Knight. Glorious Charge gives them their charge bonus for double the duration of normal charge bonuses. Neat. It gives them a leadership debuff on charging as if you were charging someone in the rear. Neat. That's still not enough to pay for just a 26 melee attack, melee defense heavy cav? That was off the top of my head. I forget if that's their exact melee attack and defense, but it's not that high. So they rely on their armor, which everything on this, well, not everything. Most of the things on this list rely on their armor, so who cares? But Winged Lancers just don't do that much damage. They have Buyer Blood, so go Unbreakable for a little bit, but if you ask me, I'd rather have an Empire Knight and save the 150 gold. Winged Lancers are pretty whatever. Griffin Legion are mildly better. Better stats, a little more expensive. Glorious Charge as well. They at least have the damage to back up having Glorious Charge, so they can get in there and really mess up some fools, whereas the Winged Lancers are more of a blocker. Still, the nerfs to their cost has hit them pretty hard, so Griffin Legion are not an A tier or even S, they're just kind of B. They are fine, solid. They do what you need them to do, but having a top tier cavalry for 1,200 gold and it doesn't have anti-large or armor piercing is a bit hard to stomach in the cost department sometimes. Skull Crushers of Khorne, going D. I don't know what this unit's deal is. Its on paper stats are so good, and it has bonus for large, and it has armor piercing. Sure, it's crazy expensive at 1,700 gold, but surely it's great. No, it is not. Its speed is pretty bad. That's one thing I can point out, is that it is a little slower than some of the other heavy cav on this list. But other than that, there's just something wrong with Skull Crushers. They are terrible. They do not perform well at all. They just suck, and I can't explain why. And sometimes in a testing situation where you just take one Empire Knight and you charge it into one Skull Crusher, the Skull Crusher will do great. You go, we did it, guys. We solved it. Skull Crushers are amazing. And then you use them in a real game with real stuff going on, and they're just terrible for their cost. I don't know. I hate Skull Crushers. They've disappointed me too many times. Copy, paste everything onto the Blood Crusher, except this unit is demonic and doesn't even have anti-large. For 1,500 gold, these are worthless. Blood Crushers of Khorne are terrible. 100 armor can't save them. They still just die to anything at any time. Demonic instability off the face of the earth. They're a waste of your gold, and they suck. Unless you're playing campaign and you're in the hyper late game and you can afford a ton of these guys, then sure, whatever. But if you're on even footing with anyone, Blood Crushers are not the people to lean on. Jade Lancers are going to go in B tier for only 800 gold. They are just copy-pasted Empire Knights for 50 gold less with slightly less stats, I think, and then Harmony bonus. Yay. They're an anvil unit. They get in the way, block stuff up, let your ranged units keep firing for a little while. Longbow Riders are going to go in C tier. A little better than Pegasus Knights in performance, but still pretty janky, still pretty bad, and very expensive. Flying cavalry units just kind of have issues landing at times, and it really bothers me. So I don't rate longbows super highly, but they exist. They're okay. Don't have good armor piercing or anti-large either. Rot Knights are going to go in A tier. Yeah, A tier. 1,800 gold. I was thinking of the 2,200 gold of the ROR. For 1,800 gold, armor piercing, anti-large, and self-regeneration for the Rot Knights is rather impressive. These Knights of Nurgle have made a lot of Nurgle's matchups playable since the Thrones of Decay DLC came out and gave Rot Knights to Nurgle. He desperately needed them. They are almost in B for being that expensive for what they do, and they're a little slow on the jump, but self-regeneration is pretty huge, so they creep up into A tier. Can perform well against other heavy cavalry, other light cavalry if they opt to fight you. Now they can run away from you because they'll outrun you, but if they do fight you, you'll win. Not great at killing infantry, but really good at killing large single entities or other cavalry. And finally, Knights of the Black Rose. I'm going to put them in S tier. I am still scarred by this unit. 1,200 gold is a lot, but they have strong anti-infantry stats, incredible melee defense, very high armor, and immune to psychology. Knights of the Black Rose are almost impossible to get off the battlefield. I just can't move them. So they are the ultimate anvil for the Empire. They will never retreat, never surrender. They just hold forever. And I still feel like they do solid damage. Like, I've had them fight my Cold One Spear Riders, and they kind of traded even. So, Knights of the Black Rose, still on my S tier list. Maybe I'm just coping hard with that one. But, God, I just can't. I can't move them. I can't move them. Screw you, Knights of the Black Rose. And that is it. That is our heavy cavalry tier list. Hopefully you had some fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you disagree, that's cool. You're supposed to comment with what you think I didn't place correctly and tell me why it should be somewhere else. There's a nice way to phrase it, and there's a bad way to phrase it. The nice way to phrase it is to say, hey, cool list, liked it overall. I think Empire Knights are actually D tier, and here's why. And you can tell me all those things, but a neat list overall. Cool. Got it. Bad way is to say, you're trolling. You put Wild Riders in C? In my Durthu campaign, they're all triple gold chevron, and I have a technology that gives them butt piercing. They're the best unit in the whole game. Yeah, you ignored the premise of the video, so pass, bro. Pass, son. Like and subscribe if you feel like helping somebody. If you don't feel like helping somebody, then just click off the video and go back to your own life. And I'll sit here in mediocrity. Woo! Roar. Subscribe, yes, yes.